This is one of the simplest ways for you to start editing using Adobe Premiere. I've transferred all of my footage from my camera or phone, depending on what you've used, to a media folder in my art documentation project that's sitting in this folder on my desktop. We're going to open up Adobe Premiere. I'm just going to click on the New Project button and I'm going to title this Art Documentation. I'm going to save this project in the project files folder of my art documentation project that's on the desktop. I'm going to click on Browse, go to my desktop art documentation and my project files. Then I click Choose and click OK. The first thing you want to do is just import your footage into Premiere. So go up to File, Import, and then find the location of the media. In this case, it's on the desktop in a media folder. I have a folder called Gallery. I'm going to select all that footage to import. I'll select the first one, scroll all the way down to the last video clip, hold down Shift and click on the last one. That will select all the footage. I hit Import. Now it's going to import all that footage for me. Now that all your footage is imported into Premiere, the easiest way to start editing your footage is just by clicking and dragging them over onto the timeline over here. The timeline is where you're going to build your edit and your final video. What it's actually done behind the scenes is created a new timeline. You'll see a duplicate here, what looks like a duplicate of the footage, but it actually has a little sequence icon here. And what we can do is just simply single click on the name, and then instead of naming it exactly the same as the clip, we'll just name it Gallery Assembly, the name that we want our final video to be named. I'll hit return and now we have a sequence called Gallery Assembly with our clip inside of it. Now we can just start adding more clips. So say we want this one to be next, and then finally this clip. Once we have all our footage that we want on the timeline, or at least our first few shots, I'm going to show you how to simply use two tools to start editing. The first one is the selection tool. The shortcut is V on the keyboard. This is the most basic tool in Premiere. If you want to move a clip from left to right, or you want to shorten a clip, you can use the selection tool. A lot of the tools in Premiere are context sensitive, meaning they will change depending on what you're hovering over. If I hover over the beginning of this clip, you'll see that it turns into a little bracket with an arrow next to it pointing right. That means I'm able to start trimming the beginning of this clip. I can click and drag to the right. Now I am trimming the beginning of this clip. You see, I even get a little bit of a preview of where that shot is going to start. I can move my playhead over and pick a point from here. I can hover over using the selection tool to the end of the clip and do the same thing. Trim the end of the clip all the way to where my playhead is stopped. Now I have a single clip that's exactly the length that I want, and I can move it into place. The other way to make clips in the timeline is to use the razor tool, shortcut C on the keyboard. So if I have a shot that I want to cut the beginning and end of in the middle, I can make a cut where I want the footage to begin. I will make a cut simply by single clicking on the footage, and that makes a cut, and I'll press play to the end. I'm going to make another cut now. I'm going to switch over to my selection tool. Using the V shortcut, select all the footage that I don't want and hit delete. Now I can select the space that I don't want here on the timeline and hit delete. I can also select space between clips and hit delete. That will make sure that there's no black frames between clips. So now that's the simplest way to start editing. To recap, we've imported our footage onto the hard drive from our camera, we've opened up Premiere, saved the project, we've imported our footage into the project, put our clips into the timeline, and just using the selection and razor tool, we've started to make our first edit. This method is great for quick and basic projects, but if you're doing something larger, you might want to consider this other method of editing. Opening footage in the source monitor and selecting from there. This way we will double click on a piece of footage and that will open that footage into the source monitor. The program monitor is tied to our playhead over here on our timeline. Hover over this clip and this piece of footage is going to show up in the program monitor. Opening footage up in the source monitor allows us to select exactly the point that we want and import only that part of the footage into our timeline. This is useful if you have a lot of footage to go through and don't want to clutter the timeline. This clip establishes the location here, so I'm going to make an in by clicking the Mark In button shortcut. I hit play and stop where I wanted to stop and set an out point. Now I can simply click and drag the thumbnail here down onto the timeline. That will bring in just that part of the footage. This is a lot cleaner way of editing rather than just dragging everything onto the timeline, but it does take a little bit more time. Some things to keep in mind is that when you create your first sequence, when you drag over your clip to the empty sequence over here, it actually creates a sequence with the same settings as your original footage. So if you use two different types of cameras that may be at different settings, you will want to be aware that if a piece of footage is a lot smaller or at a different resolution, it will look different. If for instance you import an image into your project and it's not the exact size of your sequence, it's going to be a little bit smaller or bigger. So if I import a random stock photograph as an example, I'm going to go to Desktop or Documentation Media folder, Images. I'm going to import the image and then click and drag it onto my timeline. And what you can see is that it is at a different resolution. If I want to fill the screen or show the full image, I will right click on the clip and select Set to Frame Size. If you have an image or a piece of footage that is a different size than your sequence, you can always right click and use the Set to Frame Size shortcut as a way to match everything up together. Another thing to be aware of as you're editing your videos, sometimes you want to have people talking and then have footage appear over the top of them. For example, you're editing interview footage and you might have some B-roll over the top as the interviews are going on. If I use, for example, this interview here, I'm going to bring this particular interview into the timeline.
And it helped me fund a number of projects work to afford the materials I needed.
I'm going to use my razor tool with the shortcut C and make a cut at the end of the soundbite, and then move back over to the beginning of the soundbite and make a cut. I'm going to switch back to the selection key using the shortcut V and then delete the footage that I don't want. Now I have my one soundbite, but I want to put some B-roll over the top of that. Maybe some footage of the paintings we used earlier, so let's find some footage. I double click on this clip, open it up in the source monitor, and I'm going to use my in and out method of editing. So I'm going to set an in point here and hit play using spacebar. I'll set an out point. Now instead of clicking and dragging on this thumbnail, I'm only going to bring in the video by clicking and dragging on the video film strip icon here and bring this onto video track 2. Now while I have him speaking, I hear him, but I am seeing the footage that is on top. Because it is on the top layer, we will see that first. I can continue adding more clips in this way, so if you had a lot of different soundbites, spoken word, interviews, you could have all of them be on the video track 1 and then all of your B-roll on video track 2. Two final points: if you want to add graphics to your video, just click at the start of the timeline where you want the graphics to appear. Drop down menu up the top for graphics, new layer, text. and you'll see a new text layer appear in your program window and also on your timeline. So if you double click on the text in your program window, you will be able to type in your new title. So in order to adjust the text, go up to the effects control panel in the source window. You'll see a list of menus, or alternatively go to the Windows drop down. So if I double click on the text layer, I'll be given a list of options. So if I drop down this text menu, I can change the font. And also change the size of the font. So in order to change the position, go down to the transform position menu and slide the layer to where you want it to appear. Click back on your timeline and play with the spacebar. If you then hover over your layer on the timeline, you will see the red bracket. If you right click, apply default transitions, it automatically adds a fade in. Same at the end, if you hover over, right click, apply default transitions, you'll get a fade out. Bring your playhead back and play, you'll see the fade in and fade out. So then in order to export your video, go to the end of the clips on your timeline and we hit an out point by clicking O on the keyboard. So you can see that it's highlighted. Then we go up to File, Export, Media. You'll get a dialog box that comes up. So when you see the sequence in out source range at the bottom left, that tells you that your out point and in point are the only parts of the video that will be exported. Then we go up to the format, pick a format. A good bet is H.264 for video, then a preset. You'll see a range of presets for social media and higher definition video. So we'll pick Facebook 1080p full HD. Normally you would pick a preset that was the size of your video resolution, then give it an output name, go to your folder on the desktop, art documentation, outputs, save as, we're going to leave it as gallery assembly, click save. Tells you what size the file will be, in this case 120 megabytes, and then export. So if you go to your outputs folder, desktop, art documentation, outputs, you'll find your video.